All right, so thanks for coming to the second last lecture. As I mentioned earlier, the last lecture will be next Saturday, right? In the morning, Saturday. So just take note that I'll remind everyone again at the end of the lecture that the next lecture will be on Saturday morning instead of Monday. And I apologize for that because I'm actually on a plane on the Monday, so I can't do the lecture. And actually on Saturday morning, your time, I'm in New York, so you might not see the background. I'm not sure what's the Wi-Fi connection there like. So hopefully I can still turn on the video, but if I can't, I apologize in advance if the Wi-Fi is bad there. So I'm not sure what's the setup there, but I think the lecture will continue. All right. Thanks for your GBA. So the idea is that the last lecture we'll go through the GBA. We'll cover the last lecture, and the last lecture I would say is slightly lighter, and I did include a few more problems for what we are learning today, because what we're learning today will cover the concepts. We have a few problems to solve, but most of the say questions will be seen in the last lecture as well. And of course, the last lecture being, I believe we can cover it in like 1.5 hours or maybe 2 hours. So we'll have 1 hour to do the GBA and maybe any questions that you have for your finals or any questions regarding the theories that we've covered so far, right? So that will be for the last lecture. But today, unfortunately, I have to put it up front that the content is a bit heavy, similar to last week. So, if there are any questions, do stop me at any point of time. All right. Okay, let's start. So today we are talking about time value of money. Time value. We are talking about MPV. And the concept of MPV, we have kind of seen it in the time value of money lecture a bit, but we'll go in depth today. The idea of today, right? Again, I'd like to give the broad overview. Is that now we have in the last lecture we calculated WACC, right, which is like the cost of capital for the firm, right? And then we talk about a bit of this thing called the pure play approach and stuff, where we need to tweak the WACC to a project specific kind of cost of capital. So today, what we're learning, right, is that we're going to learn how do we determine whether a project is should be accepted by the firm. So the idea being, why should the firm accept the project? And so we will use various methods, we'll see, to determine whether the firm should accept the project. But not only that, so that's the first part. The second part of it is, how do we determine the various cash flows from the project that will finally give us a figure, right? Imagine a figure, like a number, and this number will allow us to determine whether a project should be accepted or not, right? So that's the broad overview. So today you'll see a lot of details in terms of method and stuff, but at the end of the day, right, the idea of it is just, okay, we are in a firm and the firm has a project. And so we want to determine, first of all, whether the project should be accepted. And second of all, how do we get the numbers to derive that final conclusion, right? So there's two parts. Okay, so let's start with the first part first. How do we determine, right? And the idea of projects is this thing called capital budgeting. The reason why is usually when we do a project for a firm, there is a lot of capital required, capital meaning money required. And because of that, we have to be very careful in terms of the decision whether to accept the project or reject the project. And when we think about project, there are certain types, like we see here, replacement, kind of like expansion, kind of project, new products, etc. Right? So because there's a lot of money involved, right? It can go in millions or billions. We have to be very careful, and that's why we need to do this thing called capital budgeting, or in layman terms, you need to determine whether the project is good or bad. So in terms of determining whether the project should be accepted or not, let me just as usual, pull out my pen. We need to consider the cash flows. All right. So when we think about cash flows, immediately we have to think about time value of money. So again, we will do discounting of the cash flows. And the idea of it being that, at the start of a project, usually we have to purchase things like fixed assets. So FA is fixed asset. There'll be some working capital required. Remember the idea of working capital being, what is the capital that's required for day-to-day running of the business, right? CA minus CL, right? CA minus CL. So there will be some like capital is required for daily operations. There'll be some money that is required to buy a fixed asset. So that's like initial stuff. And in between, of course, when we do a project, there'll be some cash that we receive, right? For example, if the project is to sell a new product, then when we do the sales, we will have cash, right? Received from our customers. So there'll be some cash in between. Now, at the end of the project, maybe we will, kind of sell off, like for example, if the project is just a 2 years project, we might sell off the assets, right? We might no longer want to continue the project. Maybe after that, the market changes and we think that, oh, you know what, this product is no longer required, and so we don't want to do it anymore. So we might do some sales of the fixed asset. We might have some recovery of the net working capital, and so all these will affect the cash flow. So there are 3 main components: 1, 2, and 3 that we have to consider in a project. And in the typical like finance fashion, we need to consider time value of money. We need to do a risk adjustment. Generally, this is the WACC, but we need to do an adjusted WACC, right? Adjust it to the project-specific WACC. And then are we able to rank the project, whether project is good or bad, which one should we accept? Maybe there are 3 projects that we can take, but we only have capital for, let's say, 1. So what kind of ranking can we do? And of course, what is the value added? Okay, so this is the first method. This is the first method that you'll learn. And on the upfront, later you'll see in the slides again that this method is the best method. All right, so regardless, we learn, I think, quite a few, like 5 or 6 methods to determine whether the project should be accepted or not. But at the end of the day, right, the net present value, or we call short NPV, is the best method. And the idea of the NPV is, again, not very new. We saw in lecture 1. Remember, we did the Excel formula where we say equals NPV, and then I taught you how to drag the cells of the cash flow, like cash flow 1, cash flow 2, cash flow 3. Remember? And then I told you that, oh, you need to include this in the cash flow NPV formula for Excel, but then you need to plus cash flow 0, right? And cash flow 0 must be outside the formula. Remember, that's what we thought. So we are going to use this formula again. And the idea of NPV is the same that we have did previously, is that we are just going to discount all the cash flows back to year 0, right? And how do we determine whether the project should be accepted or not? It means that if we're going to discount everything to back to year 0, if the NPV is positive, means that, yeah, we should accept the project, right? Because all the cash flows that we receive after year 1, after year 0, because usually year 0 is where you have the cash outflow, right? You buy the fixed asset and all. So after that, you will receive cash inflow. So if the amount of cash inflows discounted back to the present value is more than the cash outflow in year 0, then we should accept the project. So this, the decision rule is that if NPV is positive, we accept the project. So what does this mean? It means that if it's positive, the cash inflow after year 0 will add value to the firm. That's why we want to accept the project. And value means, increasing the shareholder wealth. So this is another explanation on the rationale, where if the cash inflows from year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, etc., is more than the cash outflow, which is the cost in usually year 1, then we should accept the project. So if NPV is 0 means that the cash in and outflow is exactly like the same, right? So then we may or may not accept the project. So basically anything more than 0 is good for us. So the good thing about NPV and why is it the dominant or the main method to use when we decide a project is that it considers cash flow, it considers time value of money, it uses the WACC that's adjusted. It can rank mutually exclusive project, and we'll see what does this mean in a bit. So do not worry, and then we can see what is the value added to the firm. Okay. Now, let's understand what's mutually exclusive. So a mutually exclusive project means that you can only accept one project. And by accepting this one project, you preclude accepting or you cannot accept the other project anymore. So it's mutually exclusive. Now, we have this other thing called independent project, means that the cash flow of one project does not affect the cash flow of the other project, right? So we'll look at these two concepts later when we critique on the advantages and disadvantages. So we will look at the idea behind all this, what's a mutually exclusive and independent. But you have to understand that about like a mutually exclusive means that you accept this project, you cannot take the other one. Independent project means that the cash flow does not affect each other. So when we have multiple projects, the idea is that we should choose the projects with the highest positive NPV. So of course, if it's a negative, we don't accept it at all. But if we are choosing between projects, then we choose the highest. Okay, so this is an example that we have. So for example, we are considering this firm that wants to expand a product line. Okay, its initial cash outlay is this amount, close to 2 million. Then this means cash going out of pocket, right? So you must consider it as a negative. Remember the concept of in and out of pocket that we did previously. And now what? It generates cash flow for 6 years at this amount. Okay, appropriate discount rate is this. So I'll not be jumping to the Excel because I'm assuming that after the TMA and after so many lessons, we should be quite familiar with using the Excel way of doing formulation. But I have given you the answer for the codes here, Excel codes. So what we can do is we remember the initial cash outlay. This is cash going out of your pocket, so it's a negative. To put a negative, this is cash in, so it's a positive for you. All right, so we can just put in all this and we use the NPV formula. I want to highlight again that we remember, very important, that for NPV formula, your CF0, cash flow 0 at year 0, must be outside the formula. You cannot put it inside formula. If not, your answer will be wrong. Okay, so let's be very careful on that. So once we do the NPV, we see that, oh, the NPV actually is positive. You see here, 68K. And if it's positive, means that we should accept or reject. And why? Accept, perfect, yeah, because it's positive, right? So in a sense, it's a bit quite simple. If you do NPV, oh, it's positive, you should accept. Yeah, that's right, perfect. Okay, so we have another question here. You can try to do this on Excel and see what is the NPV. I have actually done it in Excel, and the answer, I'll just write here, 119 and 87 NPV. Okay, so between these two, which project should we accept? Because these are mutually exclusive, so you can only accept one or the other. So which project should we accept? Faster, yes, correct. So we accept the faster system because its NPV is higher. Yeah, higher, perfect. NPV, that's right. again, after the lecture, I encourage you to try to do this in Excel and see whether you can use the MPV function in Excel to do it, all right? Okay, so that's the first method that we have learned. Next, let's go to the second method. So the second method is called this thing called payback period. The intuition or the idea behind it is that how long does it take the firm to pay back the initial costs? So remember we had some costs in CF0. We have some costs here, right? It's CF0, so costs. So the idea is that how long does it take for us to generate money, right, from our project to pay back these costs? And it's almost like a break-even type of measure. And the decision rule here, right, is that if the payback period is less than some preset limit, so now the not so good part, I would say, the negative part is that you need to set a limit. So you need to say I want a payback period of, let's say, 3 years. So if any project that is payback less than 3 years is a good thing for you because it's within your preset limit, right? But this must be preset by you. Maybe it can be historical, it can be using some industry average, etc. But it has to be preset. So how do we do this? Okay, let's do the timeline. Might be easier to see. So have 1950 negative. This is year 0, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, etc. Right? So we have 450, 450, and then we keep on having 450. So what's the payback period? So I guess the formula you can call it is we have a cost of 1950, all right? And since we have 450 for 6 years, right? So at what point do we pay off this amount? At what point do we pay off this amount? So because our cash flow after year 0 is basically kind of like the same, the standard. So what we can simply do is we actually can just divide we can just divide this by 450 and we should get the answer, right? I think we should get a, let's see, what should we get? I haven't calculated this as well. Let me see, 1950 450. We should get 4.33, and basically this is the answer for the payback period. So the payback period, the project will take 4.33 years to pay back. And so now, assume that the firm requires all projects to become recovered within 4 years. Now, should we accept or reject this project now based on payback period? That's a good question. So that's one of the disadvantages of payback period, that we did not account for time value of money. So that's one of the critiques of payback period. You can actually include time value of money, meaning that we need to discount all the cash flows to year 0. There is this thing called a modified payback period, but it's not covered in our syllabus. But it's quite simple. You just discount all the cash flows back to year 0 and use the present value of the cash flows. No, wait, you should actually reject, right? Yeah, reject. So just be very careful, because they say that the firm requires projects to be recovered within 4 years, and now you are recovering it in 4.33. Yeah, so it's longer, and so we should reject. That's right. So just be careful, reject it, right? Yeah. Okay, so in this example, we can see the various payback is is a bit easy to see because we know that initial cost is 2K. All right. They say that company will accept project with 2 years payback or less. Can you see that all the payback happens in this year here at C2, which is year 2, because this 2K, right? So the payback is quite easy to see. It's all in year 2. And so that's the issue with payback. I think one of you already point out that, yeah, it doesn't account time value of money. But not only that, it's like if all the payback is within 2 years, then we can't decide. So we have to, again, like we mentioned at the start, that NPV is the best method, right? So we have to consider NPV. And you can try to do it in Excel, but I'll just write the answers here so you can verify it later. So this is the NPV. All right, so these are the NPVs. And we can see that for project B and C, their NPV is negative, right? Negative NPV. So naturally, the decision is project A. And the reason why is because in year 3, right, for project A, we get a big lump sum of 10K, which is it helps to like boost our NPV, and therefore we should take project A. All right. So these are some disadvantages and advantages. I'll just like to highlight the important one. Time value of money is the one that's important, but remember this can be corrected. So I want to highlight that this is a problem, but it's not so bad. You can just correct it. How do you correct it? For example, we have cash flows here, right? Let's say CF1, CF2. So what we do, CF3. So what we do is we just discount all the cash flows to year 0, right? Year 0 here. And then we use the same concept of payback. So we take the CF0 cash flow, right? Minus away the present value of CF1 cash flow, minus the present value of CF2 cash flow, etc., right? And then we divide by the let's say if it payback on year 2, then we divide by present value of CF3. All right. Okay, maybe at this point, let me see. I'm just going to hop over to the notes here. I just want to again reinforce how we calculate payback, because just now the examples were pretty simple to calculate payback, in the sense that it was just, oh, you know, the cash flows were all standard, right? Very standard cash flows. Let's just see an example. Okay, so let's say we have CF0, CF1, CF2, CF3. All right, so initial cost of our project, let's say, is 3,000. Now we have, let's say we have 2,000 here, there, and we have 500 here, and we have, let's say, 1,000 here. All right, so these are the cash flow things that we saw. Oops. Okay, so how do we calculate payback here? So we start with 3,000. Okay, we know that we cannot pay back in year 1, right? Because it's only 2,000. So we minus 2,000. Now, can we pay back in year 2? No, cannot, right? So we minus 500. And we know that we can pay back in year 3. We can see from the simple numbers, right? So we just divided it by year 3 number. The cash flow in year 3. So what is this? And we know that we will have 2. So we have 2 plus this. So basically it's 500 divided by 1,000. So the payback rate is 2.5 years. Right? Everyone can get this calculation. So we minus away, so we less off year 1, year 2, and then we know that we're going to pay back in year 3, right? So we simply take the year 3 as the denominator. And then we know that it's 2 plus this thing here. So it should give you 2.5 years. Everyone can get this concept because just now the payback, we saw the cash flows were very consistent, the same amount. So it's very hard to understand how to do the payback. But this is the right method if the cash flows are like changing. Right. Just going to jump back to the slides. Another issue is that it's arbitrary in terms of the cutoff. Remember, we have set a cutoff period. It also ignores the cash flow beyond the cutoff. What does this mean? Remember, we saw this example here. After the year 2, we ignored the year 3 cash flow of 10,000, and therefore it's not so good, right? That's why when we use payback, the answers were like accept everything. But when we use MPV, it was like, oh, that's the correct answer, right? We should accept project A. So that's one of the not so good thing. It's biased against long-term projects. So what does this mean? Biased against. It means that if the project is very long, and it does not generate cash flow, because when we do R&D, you might not generate cash flow yet. It's only at the end of the R&D that you generate cash flow, right? So for example, if you have a project that for the first 5 years there's no cash flow, and only in the 6th year you have cash flow, using the payback period would more often than not reject the project. Let's say if your cutoff is 2 years, then you will always be biased against long-term projects. So it's not so good. On the flip side is biased towards liquidity, means that you accept project that is very liquid in the sense that you give you cash flow immediately, right? Okay, so much about payback. Now the third measure, so this is number 3, yeah. The third method we are going to learn, number 3, is this thing called IRR. All right, so internal rate of return. And we have kind of seen this in the last lecture, just a little bit. If you flip back to your notes on the adjusted WACC, we actually saw this concept of IRR, but let's explain it in more robust terms. All right, so the IRR idea is that it's the most important alternative to MPV. Right, so usually this is the second method that most people like to use. In fact, actually in the industry, most people use IRR. They don't use MPV, or it depends on industry, okay? But now, yes, people use MPV because it's intuitive, it's independent of interest rate. So the good thing about IRR is that we do not need to determine the WACC here. Basically, your IRR is the WACC that we assume, or we try to calculate, not assume, we try to calculate. And it's based entirely on cash flow. So what does this mean? Okay, so IRR is basically the rate in your MPV formula, right? It's the rate in your MPV formula that will make your MPV equals to 0. So what rate in your MPV formula will make your MPV equals to 0? So that is the IRR. The idea of IRR. And the idea of it is that, you know what, if your IRR, the rate that makes your MPV equals to 0, is greater than your required return or your cost of capital, then we should accept the project, right? Means that this project would give you a higher return compared to your required return, right? So any IRR that is higher, we should accept it. We should accept the project. All right, so this is just a comparison. Remember, MPV is that we are using WACC or risk-adjusted WACC if it's a project. All right, and we calculate MPV. Now, IRR is different, where we calculate what is the IRR that will give you an MPV of 0. Right? Any questions regarding this difference? Okay, so we do have a question on IRR. Again, it's actually the same question that we are looking at. Now, I think this is the first time you are seeing the IRR formula in Excel. Basically, the idea is that, okay, so this is the same question. I'll not go through the question again. But what we do here is that we, instead of NPV, use IRR. And one important thing I want to highlight to you, for the IRR formula, we include all cash flow. So we include CF0 to CF6. So basically the entire chunk here. And this is the IRR formula. And when you use the IRR formula in Excel, it will generate this figure for you, which is the percentage. And IRR, remember, is the discount rate that makes the NPV equals to 0. So if you compare it with this discount rate of 9%, should we accept or reject the project in this case? And why? Accept, okay, but why do we accept it? Yeah, perfect. IRR more than discount rate. So again, it's a bit simple to see. Yeah, if it's higher, we accept it, right? So that's right. Again, I want to repeat that for IRR formula in Excel, we include CF0 and CF to CF6, so the whole chunk. All right. But for NPV, we cannot. Okay. Again, I want to highlight one small thing that we need to take note of. For example, if the question says, right, in year 3, there is no cash flow. So there's no cash flow. So in Excel, but then year 4, you continue to have cash flow. Okay. So in Excel, you still have to put a 0 in year 3. So in the cash flow component, so in the cash flow here, let me just try to erase this so it's a bit cleaner. So if year 3, there is no cash flow, you say, there's no, you still have to put 0 here in your Excel. And then let's say year 4, there is cash flow again. All right, just take note that sometimes questions can be a bit tricky in an exam, and you might miss it that, hey, you know what? Since year 3 is 0, I just ignore year 3, I go year 4. But in Excel, you still have to put a 0 there. Because remember, they are discounting Excel. How Excel is they're discounting everything. And so the 0 in year 3 is important for Excel calculation. All right. So just do take note that if it's a 0, you have to put a 0 there. Don't just skip through it. Yeah, that's right. Perfect. Yes. So do put a 0. All right. So advantages of IRR, it's intuitive. The main thing is that you do not need to estimate the required rate of return, which is like the WACC, which we had to estimate in the NPV formula. All right. It considers cash flow, time value of money, and provides some indication of risk. Now, I'm not too interested in the advantages. The reason being is that actually IRR has a lot of different advantages, and we'll go into detail, all right? And the thing is, it's important to understand the disadvantages of IRR. Oh, I would like to highlight also that, because this chapter and next week's chapter has not been covered in any kind of assessment, right? In terms of TMA or the GBA, right? So you are pretty certain, I would say, or it's a no-brainer, right? That chapter 5 and 6 would be in the finals. So if you do have any question, do stop me, right? And like there are certain points that I point out as important to take note as well. Okay, so the disadvantages of IRR is quite extensive, and we have to understand in detail and be able to explain why and how these disadvantages happen. Okay, so IRR is can produce multiple answers. We'll see how that is done. It cannot rank mutually exclusive project, and there's an investment flaw. So these are the 3 big disadvantages. We'll go in detail to explore these disadvantages. All right. So IRR and NPV will generally give the same answer, except the 3 things that we talked about earlier, the disadvantages. Okay. Now, let's look at the disadvantage 1 in detail. Okay, suppose you have a investment of the initial cost is 90K. And then after that, you will generate, positive cash flow. But hey, there is a negative cash flow in year 3. So this is a very interesting part where if you use IRR, maybe this one I should show it on Excel because it might be interesting to see the formulation. And if you can try to follow me on the Excel. Okay, let me just share Excel to see this. All right. Okay, so let's just have a look in Excel because this is interesting. So let's have a year 0, 1, 2, 3. We have some cash flows. We have negative 90, 1, 2, 3. All right, so we have these cash flows here. Now, if we're going to use IRR, right? Let's just try to input the IRR. Remember, it's like this. We get pretty nice 10%. And so based on your based on this 10%, should we accept or reject this project? So should we accept or reject based on 10%? Yeah, so reject, right? Reject a project because it's below the required of 15%. So yeah, we should reject it. Now, but the issue is that if there is a change in the sign of the cash flow, sign meaning positive or negative, more than once. So what does it mean? More than once. Then your IRR is not so accurate. More than once meaning what? So there's a negative, right, to positive. So that's one time, right? And can you see the positive to negative again? That's 2. So it changed twice. So when the sign of the cash flow changed more than once, for example, in this case, twice, your IRR will give you multiple results. So what does this mean? Because it becomes a quadratic equation. So let's do IRR again. And interestingly, IRR has this guess function. So a guess function means that you want IRR to guess a value larger than a certain limit. So whenever we have the sign of the cash flow change multiple times, usually we will guess a higher amount. So IRR will give you the smaller value. We want to guess a larger one. So what I'm going to put is I'm going to put 50% or 0.5. And IRR would surprisingly, or not very surprising, because now you know the concept, give me the larger IRR figure. All right, so this is how we get the second IRR here. And so the important concept is that once you see the sign of the cash flow change more than once, you need to, if do you want to use IRR, you need to use the guess function to input the larger guess figure in order to get the larger IRR. All right.
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean by the change in sign and the 0.5.
Okay, sure, no problem. So change in sign, right, means that, can you see that the cash flow is negative here, and then it become positive? So when the change in sign means that when normally, okay, so a normal cash flow, the change in sign is only once. Once meaning what? Year 0 is negative, and the subsequent year is all positive. So the change in sign is one time, right? From negative to positive, the change in the sign of the cash flow is once. But in this case, the change in the sign is twice. Okay, why? Because you see negative to positive one time. Then from year 2 to year 3, it becomes positive to negative. So the sign of the cash flow changed twice now, right? So because the sign changed twice, there might be, so it's a might, there might be multiple IRR that could be solved, could be obtained. And in this case, there are actually 2 IRRs. It can be 3 IRRs, can be 4 IRRs, depending on what kind of, how many times it changed. So I believe if the sign changed 3 times, there could be 3 IRR. You change 4 times and 4 IRR. All right. And so because it changed twice meaning negative to positive is once, positive to negative is the second time. So it changed twice. There's 2 IRR here. So the standard formula of IRR would give you the first one only. All right. And if you do not know the concept about the change in the sign, you will just assume that the first IRR is that's all, right? We reject the project, but no, because we need to use the guess function in Excel. And why I put 0.5. So if we don't put 0.5, basically we just get the smaller IRR. But now that we have the concept and we know that, hey, there might be a second IRR. So we typically put a number that is above 50%. So it's like a graph, right? Let's say if I put 0.1, right, it will give me the smaller value. So we want to ask Excel to find out what is the 50% larger value, the 50% or 15%, 50 percentile larger value. So we put 0.5 and we get the answer. We can put 0.6 as well. You will still get the same answer. I think if you put 0.4, also can. So Excel is, I guess, a bit smart. Like, but if you put 0.2, if you put 0.2, see, you get only one answer. So basically, at the end of the day, right, for me, what I usually do is I put 0.5, because 0.5 is the percentile, the middle point, and therefore Excel will guess the larger value for you.
So is this like looking like it's a curve, right? And then you are guessing based on the point on the x-axis, or y-axis.
Correct. So in the next slide, we have a curve. Let's go to the slide and we can see the curve. Let me just share the screen.
Can I ask how do you know how many IRR you need to set to get?
Okay. Then so it's depending on how many times the sign changed. So if the sign changed twice, there'll be 2 IRR. If it changed 3 times, there'll be 3 IRR.
Then the third IRR we will set as 0.7, the next percentile, is it?
Not necessarily true. Let me go to the slides. So just now, do you notice that if I put 0.2, I don't get the answer, right? But if I put 0.3, I get the larger IRR answer. And the reason why, right, is that what Excel is doing is to find the middle point on the curve. So this is the example that we have just seen. So I've plotted the curve for this example here. So this is the example. All right, I plotted a curve. And can you see the maximum point on the curve? It's around 0.225, around there. So what Excel is doing is that if I put 0.3, right, from here onwards, it will naturally guess the larger figure because it's beyond the maximum point of the curve, right? This is the maximum point. So Excel would guess, oh, okay, there is you want the bigger one. So I give you the bigger one now, which is this answer here. Now, if remember just now you saw I put 0.2, I do get the smaller value because 0.2, can you see? It's here, this small part of the curve. It has not crossed the maximum point here, which is why in this case 0.5 works. And like you're asking, right? So should we put 0.7 if there's 3 IRR? Not necessarily true, because it depends on how the curve is being plotted, right? What does this mean? Is, for example, if I have if I have a curve like this, okay, this axis, and let's say I have three IRR now. So it becomes like a cubic curve, something like that, right? So I have, can you see the IRRs are basically the points where it is zero, where NPV is zero. So it's on the points here. All right. So when I have three, it depends on what is the maximum point here and what is the minimum point here. All right. So it gets very complicated. Don't worry that you will not be asked to do now 3 IRR stuff, but this you need to know the concept of it, right? They'll 2, they might ask you to find the 2 IRR, but 3 usually no. I've never seen that before. But it's possible. So the idea is that you need to know that's possible. And so the guess function for the 3 IR should be, whether is it beyond this curve, beyond the maximum point, or above the maximum, or beyond the minimum point here, right? Beyond the minimum. Okay, so let me just erase this. So the idea of this curve, right? What am I plotting here? Let me go back and explain again. So what I'm plotting here is the NPVs, okay, and the discount rate. So discount rate is the x-axis, NPV is the y-axis. And so the IRR, right, are the points where, and remember, IRR is the points where NPV equals to 0. So IRR are the points that cuts the x-axis, which is here and here. All right. And so if you notice the profile of the curve, the portion that we will accept the project is when NPV is more than 0, right? Where it's more than 0 here. So in this portion is the part that if the discount rate is between these two parts, we will accept the project. So so going back to the question, the discount rate was 15%. Based on this curve, should we accept the project now or reject the project? Accept. Perfect. Why? Because it is here, right? 15% is here and is within the positive region. All right. So you need to know how to read this curve, right? So for example, if the discount rate was, let's say, 0.5%, which is here 0.5, means that your NPV is always negative, and so we should reject. Or if the discount rate is, let's say, 50% here, we should always reject the project. Any questions for this? I will not be too worried about this cubic form. I think it will be too tough. They will not ask you to do this. But for quadratic, it's possible. All right, perfect then. So that's the issue. Okay, so bottom line is that IRR cannot really, or can, but you might be very, very careful to read cash flows that change the sign more than once. Remember, more than once meaning negative, positive, then the positive, negative again. So it changed twice, right, in this case. So it can, but there are a lot of issues with it, and we have seen it here that we need to be very careful. So it's not so good, right, IRR in terms of non-conventional cash flow. So this is the concept that it changed more than once. There will be more than one IRR. Okay, so the second issue with IRR is that it cannot rank or cannot choose mutually exclusive project. Remember earlier we saw NPV and we are able to decide a higher NPV means that we should choose that project, right? We had an example. But in IRR, we are not able to do so. And there are two reasons why. The two reasons is, first of all, when the project has substantially different initial investment and the timing of cash flow is different, your IRR will give you the wrong result. Okay, we have an example to illustrate this. So let's look at two mutually exclusive projects here, project A and project B. First of all, we already immediately noticed that the initial cash flow amount for project A and project B is very different, right? 500 and 400. Again, we also notice, hey, you know what? The timing of cash flow or the amount of cash flow is also very different, right? The amount, this is quite consistent and 325. This one, there's a drop to this 200. Okay, so potentially your IRR would give you wrong answers already. Yeah? You should be a bit I would say aware of this when you see like, hey, you know, the cash flows are very different and all. And remember, these are mutually exclusive projects. So we can only choose A or B, but not both. Now, let's calculate the IRR using Excel. I'll not show you, but you can try to do it. Based on IRR, is given like this. All right. And if we, you know, do not or have not taken this course and we don't understand the background of IRR, you will normally say, hey, you know what? Which between these two IRR, the big one better, right? Higher return. So I should take B. But that's if you have not studied this course. But then if you remember, hey, I remember Drew was saying that you must be very careful with IRR when you're doing mutually exclusive. And so if you have taken this course and then you're like, oh, okay, let me calculate the NPV and see what does the NPV say now. If you notice, the NPV actually say project A is the right answer. You should take project A. And remember, this kind of project is like millions of dollars. So, you know, if you eventually work for a company that asks you to do this kind of analysis, a wrong decision would cost the company like millions of dollars. So it's important. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is that NPV is the best method, the best. So we know that NPV is telling us the right answer, right? And this is wrong. Now, the question is, why? Why is IRR telling or giving us a wrong answer? And that's what we want to find out, right? And that's what we want to understand. Because, you know, when you work and then like your boss asks you to calculate this, and then he asks you, why not use IRR? So then you need to explain, right? It's not enough to say, oh, because NPV is the best. But your boss was like, oh, you know, explain to me why IRR is wrong in this case. So let's try to explain why IRR is wrong. So let's plot the curve. So we are going to plot the curve, the same kind of curve, discount rate against NPV. Okay. And then we're going to plot the two projects curve. So so these are the IRR that are calculated here. Okay, so I plot the curve in Excel for you, and there's this thing called a crossover point. So if you notice when you plot the curve, right? Of course, you can use point intersection in Excel. We can do that to find what's the crossover point. But basically, the idea is that when I plot the curve for project A, which is the dotted line, there are certain profile, can you see here, that is above the project B IRR, NPV profile here. So I find what is the crossover point. So I provided you the formula to how to find crossover point. Basically, you just take the cash flow from project A minus the cash flow for project B, and then so negative 500 minus negative 400, you get this. And basically you calculate what is the difference in the cash flow, and you use the IRR formula. And when you do that, you get the crossover point. So what I'm trying to say here that you need to know how to calculate crossover point. Okay, it's an important concept. So once I find what's the crossover point, which is here, 11.8. Again, you know the IRR is the point where the curve cuts the x-axis when NPV is 0. So these 2 points are the IRR here, right? So what does the crossover point tell me now? Do you notice that when the discount rate is before the crossover point, which NPV profile is higher, project A or project B? before the crossover point. A, perfect, that's right. Can you see the dotted line is higher here? So when the dotted line is higher, means that before the crossover point, so that means any discount rate that is less than 11.8%, we should accept project A. Now, any project that is more than the crossover point, means that the discount rate is more than the crossover point, we should accept project, we should accept project B, right? B, because can you see the profile here is higher? So our discount rate was 15%, and 15% based on this profile say that we should accept project B. All right. But remember, what is the required rate of return given? Okay, so before that, let's go back a little. So based on the IRR profile here, we know that, or if we do not know the concept of mutually exclusive issue with the IRR, based on the IRR, we would just take the larger one, right? We say project B, let's take it. But if we consider what is the required rate of return, let's go back to the question. The required rate, what's the required rate of return? Is 10%, right? Required rate of return. Now, let's go back to the profile. Where is 10%? Can you see that 10% is here, right? 10% is here. Means what? Based on the graph, we should actually accept project A, which is the right answer that MPV is providing you. All right, so based on IRR, we should accept this, right? But if we really plot the curve and we see the profile, this will give us the right answer. And the right answer is that we should accept project A because the profile is higher. Now, why would IRR give you a different answer? So there are the two key reasons is scale. So what's happening? If you notice, project B is smaller. Why? The initial cash outlay is 400 versus 500 in project A, right? So project B is smaller. So it means that for IRR, because the project is smaller, the opportunity cost for the project is higher as the discount rate increases. So since project B has a very small initial, there's only 400, it will have a higher MPV profile after the crossover point, which we have seen here, right? After the crossover point, the higher discount rate would favor project B. And that's why we see that the profile is higher. All right. Now, that's the scale component based on opportunity cost, right? So a higher discount rate would result in higher opportunity cost, and therefore the small project will quickly free up the funds, which can then be reinvested at a high opportunity cost because of the high discount rate, right? That's why your MPV, that's why for project B, because it's smaller, IRR would say choose project B, but you know it's wrong, right? Now, in terms of timing, so the project that pays back faster will have more cash flow to be reinvested. Okay, so when we think about payback, right? Once we know payback, we need to calculate payback period. So I'm going to calculate the payback period here. So for project A, 500 minus 325 divide by 325, right? I hope everyone is able to calculate payback now. So it's 1 plus this for project A. For project B is 1 plus 400 minus 325 divided by 200, right? So I think the answer is 0.375. This one here is 0.54. So we can see that project B pays back faster, right? You can see that project B pays back faster. All right. So what does this mean? When project B pays back faster, it means that the cash flow can be reinvested. And when it's being reinvested at a higher discount rate, so the payback is given here, right? Then project B will be favored because of the higher reinvestment. And we can look at it in the graph. Can we see that when the discount rate is higher, we will naturally accept project B because the payback is faster, right? And so we can reinvest the cash flows at a higher discount rate. All right, I'll go on to the last part on reinvestment rate assumption, because this would tie into this component. Remember, I keep on saying reinvested. So what does this reinvested mean? So I say what reinvested at a higher discount rate. Higher discount rate favors small projects. So what's happening here? So the thing about IRR is that IRR assumes that you are reinvesting cash flows at the IRR rate. So going back to this question here, what does this mean? It means that when you use IRR for project B, we are going to reinvest the cash flows because the payback is this mark, right? The payback is only 1 point. Sorry, actually this is not 0. Here is 1. 1 is 1. So we know that we're going to pay back in 1.375, right? So the thing is that IRR assumes that you're going to reinvest your cash flow at 22.17% compared to this 19. So of course, if you reinvest in such a high rate, right, you'll get more returns. But the issue here, or the criticism here, is that can you actually invest your money at 22%? Is this realistic? Do you think it's realistic to reinvest your cash flow at 22%? No, yeah, perfect. Because we know that we should use the cost of capital, right? Maybe you should use 10%. So what's happening here? So it means that IRR assumes that you are going to reinvest at, let's say, for project B, at 22%. But this is not true. And so because of that, it will lead to the wrong answer. But let's look at NPV. So NPV assumes, remember we are using WACC here. So it assumes that you are reinvesting the cash flow at WACC, which is kind of, make more sense, right? You're using an opportunity cost. It's more realistic, it's better. So this is another criticism. So remember there are 3 we talk about. First is the if it's a non-conventional cash flow, remember when the sign change. The second is that for mutually exclusive project, it will give different answer because of 2 issues: the timing of the cash flow, right, of the payback period, and what's the initial investment amount, right? And then we look at the 2 graphs. And the last but not least is the reinvestment assumption, where IRR assumes that you are reinvesting at 22%, which doesn't make sense, right? But NPV assumes that you are reinvesting at WACC, which makes more sense. So remember, if we have mutually exclusive project, always use MPV. Yeah. So again, the concept is that if there's any issues, always go back to MPV. Okay, so before we move on to this question, let's take a quick break. Let's come back at, let's say, 8:17. We'll take a 7 minutes break. If there's any question, feel free to just write them in the chat. All right, welcome back. Hope everyone is still all right. Okay, so let's carry on with this short question. So this is a mutually exclusive project that it was mentioned here. Okay, and they ask you to calculate what's the IRR. So I'm sorry that I shouldn't put dash. This is not negative, so the IRR is not negative. It's just dot 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 dot. I should change this so it's not negative. And so based on A, right? Based on the IRR, which one should we accept? So this is assuming that you have already put in the values in Excel and calculated IRR. So based on the figures given in A on IRR, which one should we accept here? A, correct. So the IRR is bigger, right? 22.2. If we calculate NPV, which one should we accept based on the NPV rules? For this NPV, which one should we accept? E, that's right. Okay, and so this is like the typical way of how a question can be asked, but there is usually a part C. So part C will be explain the reason for the difference. Okay, so that's where our long conversation that we had the past 45 minutes should come in, right? And the reason why you notice that, okay, the initial cash flow is the same, so we don't have an issue with that. There is no non-conventional cash flow because the sign did not change, so that's not the issue. But we have issue about what? The timing of the cash flow. Can you see that it's so different, right? For A, you get the money so fast. So if the question asks you explain, right? Explain the difference. We need to talk about what? We need to talk about the payback period. So please calculate payback period in order to prove that the payback for project A or cash flow A is faster, right? We can see that it's faster, but we need to calculate it. Calculate payback. After you calculate payback, then we need to use which explanation? We need to use this explanation here about timing of the cash flow. And we need to use the explanation on the reinvestment assumption, right? Because the payback is faster and IRR assume that you're going to reinvest it at, what's the percentage here? 22.2%, again, very big. So reinvesting is so high, but this might not be the cost of capital, right? So we need to explain this in let's say your finals, if they ask you to do something like this, you need to be able to explain, all right? So this is an example of how questions can be tested regarding the concepts. Of course, they typically will ask you plot the graph and all these things because it might take too much time. But you should be able to explain the concepts. All right, so we see that a lot of issues with IRR. Now, people have came up with this other thing called modified IRR, MIRR. And the idea of the modified IRR is that it corrects two issues. The reinvestment rate issue. Remember, we say that, oh, it's reinvesting at 22.2%. That doesn't make sense, right? So it corrects for this, and it corrects for non-conventional cash flow. Now, there are three, I want to have distinct methods. So these three methods, will give you different answers. And the three answers are correct and they are distinct. I repeat, distinct meaning that they are different, they are unique, and they just give you unique answers. And that's one of the issues MIRR because there are many methods to use, or 3 methods to use. So there's the discounting approach, the reinvestment approach, and the combination approach. And I want to highlight the combination approach is what, if you use the formula MIRR in Excel, this is what the method they will use, the combination approach. But we do need to know what is the discounting approach and the reinvestment approach, and be able to calculate by hand how to do it. So let's look at the first approach first, the discounting approach. So discounting approach suggests that we discount future outflows to the present, and add it to the CF0. And of course, we use the finance rate or the cost of capital, right? So we use the WACC rate for this discounting. So this method solves the non-conventional cash flows, since all the outflows are being discounted back to CF0. So it will prevent the multiple IRR issue. So let's have a look at example here. Let's skip this first. So this is an example. All right. So we have this initially, you can immediately see there's a non-conventional cash flow here, right? The sign changed twice. And now we need to use MIRR. All right. So I want to illustrate the discounting approach. Then we'll go back to the other slides to look at, go back to the initial slides to look at the other reinvestment approach and combination approach, right? So the discounting approach, remember what the slide say, you need to discount all outflows back to year 0. So we notice, hey, in year 5, there is outflow here. I need to discount it back to year 0. All right. So what does this 1 and 2 says? It means that this is the first step you should do. So step 1, do the discounting. So we discount this outflow back to year 0 here. All right. So I discount it by how many? Remember, we do the bunny hop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we hop back 5 times. So we need to discount this by 1.1 to the power 5. All right. So once we get this, we can input the values in Excel. Okay. And we use basically the IRR formula. We don't use the MIRR formula because the MIRR formula uses the combination approach, but now we're doing the manual method of the discounting approach. So once we discount the outflow back to year 0, then it becomes a conventional, right? Can you see now it's just a conventional? And so we can use the IRR formula. I want to highlight to you again that the rate we use to discount it is based on the one given the question, which is 10%, right? Which is I guess, is the WACC, or cost of capital. So I also want to highlight to you that in case you have another, let's say this one. So let's say year 3, we have another negative cash flow. So now the sign changed 3 times, right? Then we also need to discount this back to year 0. So we discount any cash outflow to year 0. All right, everyone's okay with this discounting method? Okay, so I'll go back to this slide. The next method we have is the reinvestment approach. So what does this reinvestment approach means? It means that we will, instead of discounting, now we compound. So we are bringing it to the end, FV. So we FV all cash in or outflow except the first one to the end. So what does it mean? We're reinvesting all the cash flows and not taking them out of the project until the end. And the reinvestment rate we are using will be the WACC rate. So we solve the reinvestment rate issue here. So I'm going to hop back to this question to illustrate the reinvestment approach. So remember, we compound all cash in and outflow. So in this sense, right, I guess it's all inflow lah, but inflow meaning is all positive numbers. But if it's negative, right, there's no difference. We have to compound everything to the end except the first one here. Now, when we do that, so I've done it here, we compound it all to the end, all right? Compound it all to the end. Now, when we remember just now I mentioned that even Excel, you have to put 0. You have to put, you don't leave it blank. I think if you leave it blank, you have an error. You do have to put 0 for the in-between. So now what are we having? We have a outflow in year 0, and then we have nothing in between because we have compounded all the cash flows. And then in year 5, we have a lump sum of this amount here, which is given by this because of the compounding. And so we compute using the IRR formula again, because this is a manual method. So we use the IRR formula, and we get 14.9 as the IRR. All right. And in terms of the interpretation of the IRR, so compute IRR will give you this, and basically this is considered MIRR. It's modified because we have some modification, right? And the way to determine whether you should accept or reject a project based on MIRR is the same as IRR. So if it's larger than the required rate of return, which is 10%, so we should accept it. I want to highlight here that when we are compounding, we use the WACC of 10%. So reinvestment, remember, we will compound all in and outflow. So both in and outflow to year 5. So after determining reinvestment approach and discounting approach, you notice immediately that, hey, the values are already so different, right? 19.75 and this one is 14.9. So because of that, you know, yeah, there is no best method. These are various approaches. And so people came up with the last method, which is the combination approach. I guess if you cannot decide between discounting and reinvesting, you just do both, right? So the combination approach. So how does combination approach works? You discount outflows to the present and inflows to the end. So inflows go to FV, outflows goes to PV. So I'm just going to flip over to the last part of this example. So what's happening here? Remember, outflows goes to PV, right? So outflows, because you have an outflow here, it goes to PV. So you PV this outflow, and then all your inflows goes to FV. So all this inflow all will go to FV here, which is what is being done in step 2. This step 1. And once you do that, again, you have put 0 in between. All right, and we use the IRR formula here, and we are able to get the MIRR using the combination approach of 14.39. Alternatively, if you are lazy to do the manual method, you can just plug in the MIRR formula in Excel, and you just highlight this entire chunk of cash flow, and you should immediately just get the answer like this, 14.39. You will immediately just get the answer. So only in the combination approach, there is a direct Excel formula. In the reinvestment and the discounting approach, you have to do it manually. Okay, maybe I'll just pause here. We have covered quite a bit. And of course, last but not least, I'll highlight that the number, the calculated figure is again different, right? So there is really no right method for MIRR. Any questions regarding MIRR? Okay, so perhaps there's no questions at this point in time. Yes, so the exam will indicate which method to use. Yeah. So these are just some comments. MIRR gives unique numbers for each method. MIRR is superior to IRR because there are two issues that it addresses: the non-conventional cash flow, remember, and the discount rate, right? What is the reinvestment rate that we use? So there's a small criticism here that the value of MIRR is modified by the reinvestment rate, remember? And we shift the cash flow here and there, right? Therefore, it might not be truly internal in that sense. So again, at the end of the day, NPV is the better. If you have to decide, NPV is still better. Okay, I've mentioned this. So MIR corrects for the reinvestment rate at WACC, avoids multiple IRR problem. The decision rule is basically the same as IRR decision rule. Anything above the required rate of return, we accept. Okay, so we have talked about MIRR. Let's look at, I believe, the last method of determining the project, and this is called the profitability index, or PI in short. All right, so PI. This is actually used in the industry quite a bit, especially in banking. We use this thing called PI a lot. And the idea of PI takes into account time value of money. That's why, and it's very easy to interpret, right? So what do? We discount all future cash flows to the present value, and we just divide it by initial investment amount. All right. So of course, if your future value of your cash flow is more than your initial investment amount, then it's good, right? So what does it mean? Anything more than 1, we should accept. So for example, if 1.1, if your PI you calculate is 1.1, it means that for every $1 invested, you create 0.1 or 10 cents, basically. So it's very useful for a situation of capital rationing. So we'll try to understand what's capital rationing. And why is it being used in industry a lot? Because most firms are limited in terms of capital, right? Not most, I think all firms are limited. So using the PI helps the firm determine which project to choose when they have limited capital. So the idea of capital rationing here is that every firm has limited capital, so we should choose the project which gives us the highest PI number, right? It means that per capital invested, we are getting the most amount of money here. All right, so we have an example here, how we, the same example. Now, how do we calculate PI? So remember we say, what is the, we need to NPV first, right? We need to, what's the present value of future cash flow? So we have 6 years of cash flow here. So we need to NPV 450K for 6 years. So if you have your Excel, try to do this. I believe the answer is 2018663. So when we NPV the 6 cash flows to year 0, we should get this answer here. And now, how do we calculate PI? So PI, you simply take 2018663 divided by the initial cash outflow of 1950123. All right, and the answer you should get is 1.035. Should we accept or reject this project based on the PI? No, it's actually accept. Okay, it's accept. You know why? We accept it because is more than 1. Yes, correct. So accept because it's more than 1. Remember, for PI is fixed. There is a rule that if it's more than 1.0, accept. This is fixed for all kinds, because basically what does it mean? More than 1. More than 1 means that the discounted cash flows will be more than the initial investment that you make. So if it's more, then you should accept it because you're getting a profit already. Yeah, so anything more than 1, you accept. Okay, so there is this example here. And actually in the example, normally in exam questions, this is not given to you. I've calculated a PI so that to explain it easier, and so you don't have to do the calculation. But what they usually give you is like, oh, I just give you NPV, I give you the initial investment. Then they ask you which project should you select and what's the total NPV based on your choice. Now, when we see a question based on capital rationing, why I say capital rationing? Because can you see that you have only 100 million available? So you are fixed in terms of capital. And now the question is, which one should we accept? Which project should we accept, right? And when you are in a capital rationing issue, always fall back on PI. So PI here says that we have calculated the various PI given here. So based on PI, which project should we choose first? Based on PI. Because we need to rank them now, right? Good. First is C. Second, E. Very good. Third, so third is a bit like, oh, should I do A or should I do D? Right? So now at this point, at this juncture, right, we will have to use a composite of the tools that we have learned. Composite of tools meaning that we have to use the composite of the various methods, right? Okay, so someone suggested A, but let's think about using a composite, meaning using various tools. We are given the NPV here. Now, between A and D, we know the PI are the same, but which one has a larger NPV? D, perfect. So based on NP, because remember, at this point in time, we already learned various tools. So we need to use a composite of tools because if you notice, no tool is perfect, right? They have disadvantages, advantages. So using a composite of tools, we should choose NPV of this because it's 20 million. And so this is number 3. And now let's aggregate our initial investment amount. So we're using this 3. Can you see that it is within 100 million? So it's within our budget. We can do it, which is perfect. And so PI allows you to calculate. D allows you to determine the capital rationing when we are in a situation of capital rationing and determine which project to select. So the answer is C, D, E. Total NPV of our total NPV is this, right? So 10 plus 20 plus 12. So it's actually the largest, I guess, choice. Give you the largest NPV for a given capital that you have. So PI is really good for capital rationing. And at this point, I would like to highlight that whenever we make decisions, if there's a question about decisions, right, whether project should accept or rejected, always think about composite of tools. So do not only focus on PI, do not only focus on IRR, right? Think about it in a cohesive kind of concept where, because we have learned so many tools, try to use multiple tools. And because in the exam, you can use Excel, it's very fast to just get the answer, right? We saw once we do the cash flows, we can just use NPV, use IRR, and then now we know PI, right? So it's very fast. So try to calculate multiple tools so that it gives you the right answer. So there are some disadvantages. Advantages, you can have a look at it, not too exciting. So there are some disadvantages is that, it might lead to wrong answer if it's a mutually exclusive. So again, it has some disadvantage. If it's mutually exclusive, it will give you the wrong answer here. But it does consider time value of money and useful for capitalization. Okay, so we have an example here. We are again in a capital rationing issue, right? Because we have a limited capital of 10 million here. Now we have 3 projects. Again, normally in questions, this is not given to you normally. So this is what I have calculated for explanation. In questions exam, we just give you this, right? This part here. They just give you this. So the part on the right is usually not given. Nevertheless, we calculate NPV, we calculate PI, and then we do the ranking again, right? So we rank this as 1, 2, and 3 based on PI, because we are in a capital rationing issue. So since we only have 10 million, let's choose project B and C, right? Because B and C are the highest in terms of the PI. So we want to, once we choose B and C, we want to check, okay, we can actually meet the capital amount that we have of 10 million. So it's perfect. We can choose B and C here. So it shows that PI gives you the right answer. Now, again, we have this example here where we are given some figures, right? We are given the initial cash outflow, we are given NPV, we are given a PI now. And the question is, okay, let's rank them in terms of PI first. So we rank them in terms of PI. This is the biggest, right? 2 and 3. And we know that we have limited of 50 million. So if we want to choose B and C, you notice that, hey, if we choose B and C, we do not have enough money because we only have 50 million, right? We have not enough money. So what should we do? If we cannot choose B and C together, then we just choose the second one, right? We just choose project C, because project C, the PI is the second largest. And in terms of NPV, yeah, it's pretty good too. It's quite high. So do you notice that if we choose project A and B together, the NPV, right, would still be lesser than project C? So it actually highlights to you that PI gives you the right selection, particularly for capital rationing problem. So this is a very good thing, right? Now we have a mutually exclusive issue here, mutually exclusive project. So we can only choose project A or project B, but not both. All right. So now it's not a capital rationing issue. Now it's about mutually exclusive. So we calculate again the various IRR, NPV, PI. All right. So in the back of our mind, we know that NPV is the right method, right? So NPV says we should choose project B here. IRR and PI gives you project A. And we already kind of know or understand the issue with IRR. Remember IRR, the issue is, oh, wait, if the initial cash flow is different, IRR will give a wrong answer. That's one issue, right? The second issue is that if the subsequent cash flow is also different in terms of value, IRR also will give the wrong answer. And so in this sense, PI falls track to the issues relating to IRR as well. So if what does this mean? It means that, see, PI suggests that you should choose project A, but this is the wrong answer. Because actually project B generates more MPV. And so the issue comes into play because it's a mutually exclusive. You only can choose one project. But if you can select two project A, that means you do project A twice. All right. If you do project A twice, your cash outflow would be the same, right? If you do times 2, then this will be 20, right? This will be 40. And can you see that the MPV will be around 16, right? Which is more than project B doing it once. And so if we can do project A twice, the total MPV will be higher. And that's the right answer. But because we are in a mutually exclusive setting, we can only do one project, and we can do it once and only one project, which is why our PI is giving us wrong answer. So consider the idea is consider all cash flow criteria when making decisions. So I want to highlight again, do not just use one criteria, consider many criteria because all of them have their disadvantages and advantages. Of course, at the end of the day, MPV rules, they are the best. All right. But do know what are some of the drawbacks and reasoning for the drawbacks. For example, the PI, the IRR, what are the drawbacks and how do we reason the difference in selection that we have received. All right, I will not go through this question because we have the solutions here. So just go through it yourself. It's not too complex. All the answers are given. I would like to go on to the second part of this lecture. All right. So before we go on to the second part, any questions regarding the selection criteria? So we have learned all the selection criteria for projects. Now what we're going to do is we have so far always assumed, or not assumed, but we have always been given these cash flows, right? So now what we're going to learn is we are going to formulate the cash flows. How do we get the cash flow numbers? So that's what we're going to do here. So before we go there, any questions regarding the selection criteria? Okay, I guess we are good. So let's go on to the selection criteria. Let's go on to the cash flow. So now we're going to in-depth in terms of the cash flow, right? What should we include in the cash flow? What should we not include in the cash flow? And the various calculations. So now it's a bit more calculation heavy. Okay, so let's talk about sunk costs first. So we have various, remember now we're determining whether the cash flow should be included or whether the cash flow should not be included. All right, so we start off with this concept of sunk costs. So sunk costs are basically costs that accrued or was incurred in the past and should not be considered in the MPV of a project. So we have example here. So a firm wants to reevaluate a project. The project already cost the firm 50K. A further investment of 40K is required. The MPV of the future cash flow is 60K. So should we continue with the project in this case? Yes or no? So should we do this project? Yes or no, maybe we shouldn't based on the various numbers. Okay, we have a no. So unfortunately, the answer is yes. Okay, why? Let me explain why should we accept this project. Let's look at the project here. The project has already cost 50K. So 50K is actually a sunk cost. Okay, so why is there this no and yes, right? So N and Y means that no means that if the cost is considered sunk cost, exclude from project, no. All right. So 50K is a sunk cost. The only cost that you should consider is a further investment of 40K. All right. And we know that the project will give us 60K. So we are only considering these two numbers. If we're receiving 60K and we need an investment of 40K, if you use MPV, 60 minus 40, 20K, it's positive, right? Positive NPV. So positive MPV. So we should accept the project based on MPV rules. All right. So I want to highlight to you that sunk cost is very important. And this is the cost that in questions you must be very careful because it's easy to just include sunk costs. And you must read the question very carefully. All right. We will have, I think, one example illustrating which is sunk, which is not sunk cost. And it's sometimes can be very tough to identify sunk costs. So I want to highlight sunk cost is important. Now, let's look at opportunity cost here. So opportunity cost is the cost related to a loss option. So we lose an option of doing something because of opportunity. So a firm owns a land. The firm can either use the land for the project or sell it for 100K. Suppose the NPV of the project is 80K. Should the firm accept this project? Yes or no? Should we accept this project in this case? Okay, the answer is actually no, we should not accept the project. Okay, so sunk cost and opportunity cost can be very tricky to understand. So why should we not accept the project? Can you see that the firm can sell the land for 100K? Right? I can sell the land for 100K, but if I'm going to do this project, it's only give me 80K. So using MPV rule is negative, 80K minus 100K is negative 20K MPV. So based on MPV rules, it suggests that I should not accept the project. I should just sell the land because I get more money by selling the land. All right. So I want to highlight to you that sunk costs and opportunity costs are I would say the toughest cost to identify in a question. So be very careful, right? So in opportunity cost is the cost of the loss option. So the option in this case was to sell the land. So to sell the land, it actually gives you more money than if you do the project. So we should sell the land in this case. Now, side effect cost, indirect cost, this is quite easy to identify. One example here is a new project will generate a cash flow of 10 million a year. However, introducing the new product will reduce the cash flow of existing project by 4 million. So what is the cash flow we should use to evaluate this project? Do we use 10 million? Do we use 4 million? Or do we not use any figure or use a combination of figures? So what cash flow should we use to evaluate this project? So we should use 10 minus 4 million. So 6 million is the cash flow that we should use to evaluate the project. Why? Because the new product will generate 10, but but it will result in an erosion cost of 4. So the actual cash flow that we get is actually only 6. 10 minus 4. Everyone get that? So everyone understand erosion costs? And just now we mentioned sunk costs and opportunity costs. So next is the net working capital. So again, it's a Y, means that we should include this in our cash flow, is relevant cash flow for us. And working capital is CA minus CL, and we know working capital from lecture 1, way back in like nursery that we have, when we did the first lecture, is the capital that is required to generate cash flow, to run the business, right? It's the day-to-day capital that's required. So yeah, net working capital is here, we should include it. Finance costs, we should exclude it. Then tax, we should include it. And we'll see why. We'll see the reason for all this in a bit, once we reconstruct the cash flows. We'll have a clearer example. So the concept of the broad umbrella is that we are only concerned with cash flows that are incremental. So what new cash flows we are getting or not getting, right, from the project. So we're not interested in things that have already been done, like sunk costs. We are interested in things like opportunity costs, right? Because of the project, something might happen. So we are interested in things that will increase or decrease because of the project. So there's a general principle. All right, so we have this example here, and let's determine which cost should be accepted and which cost should not be accepted. So it spent 250K to work on a preliminary version of a car. So basically a company to spend this amount. It also spent 150K performing test marketing analysis. Which of these costs should be included in the project? So which cost should we include for this in this case? Yeah, very good. Both are sunk costs. Okay, both are sunk costs. Do not include it. Now, it has an empty warehouse in which it can store the new line of sports car. Should the cost of the warehouse be included in the MPV? Okay, so cost of the warehouse. Okay, so there are two parts to this. So if you're talking about cost, meaning the purchase price of the warehouse, then it's considered a sunk cost. So purchase price equals to sunk cost. So no, you should not include it. But if you're thinking about cost of the warehouse being the sales of the warehouse, then it is a odd cost, which is yes, include. So just be careful. It can be yes and no here. The firm is currently producing an existing line of compact cars. Some of the potential customers of its sports car will come from customer base of its compact cars. Do we need to take account this when calculating the MPV of the new sports line? I hope this is quite clear. Should we include this? Yes, yeah, we should include it because this is a erosion cost, right? So erosion costs generally are a bit easier to identify in this sense. Okay, so we have another question here to try to illustrate. So Kenny Incorporated is looking to set up a new manufacturing plant in South Park. The company bought land 6 years ago for 7.5 million in anticipation for using it in this warehouse and distribution site. But the company has since decided to rent this facility elsewhere. Okay, first of all, we are determining which cost we should include. Should 7.5 million be included in our project NPV? No, yes, because it's a sunk cost. Now, the land would net 10.3 million if it was sold today. So, should the cost of the land be included in the NPV of the project? Yes, opportunity cost, correct. The company wants to build the new manufacturing plant on the land, okay? The plant will cost this amount to build and the site will require this amount of grading. So should these two costs be included in the project's NPV? 24 million and 900? Yes, both yes, correct? Yeah, so yes, that's right. So that are the various costs. So the answers are here actually. Here, or not go through them. Okay. So you know what? Let's take another 7 minutes break. We'll come back and we'll cover this CFA, which is actually something you saw in lecture 1. So I guess back in lecture 1, I did mention that this concept of CFA is very important. Now we're using it here to reconstruct the cash flows. All right. So yeah, let's come back in 7 minutes. All right, welcome back. We have a short break. So at this point, maybe I just want to remind everybody again that for next week, our lecture, the last lecture will be on 29 in the morning at 8:30. So 8:30 a.m. So just want to remind everybody that it will be on Saturday. Just take note of the change. Also, I think earlier I mentioned to those that came on time that the last lecture basically will go through the lecture slides. Content is less, so we'll do the GBA as well. We'll try to go through the GBA questions. And there will be a component where we'll talk about a lot more about problems relating to this, what we have done today, because they're important for like the finals, as I mentioned earlier, that this lecture and last lecture was not covered in any assessment, right? So it'll be more important. As well as if you do have any questions, we can try to discuss and answer them so everyone can learn, right? Okay, so let's now construct the cash flows. And when we understand the cash flows of asset, we have seen this formula before, all right? There are three key components: the operating cash flow, which is given by this formula, cash flow from the daily operations; the net cash spending, which is the cash relating to purchase of fixed assets; and the change in net working capital, right? And we talked about net working capital previously. So all these formulas are not new. They are all in your lecture 1. So I'll try not to spend too much time on them, right? Because we have talked in detail previously. All right. So I want to highlight the importance of this formula here called the cash shilling approach. And we'll use this formula quite often, even though we might use this formula as well. But most questions, it'll be easier to use the last method, all right? Although some questions we need to use the first method. Okay. So if you kind of already forget about this CFA, I'll encourage you to rewatch lecture 1, where we already discussed in detail about this CFA, and we even proved the formulas of how we get the various formulas, right? Okay, so let's move on. Now, in considering this net capital spend, this is only so this formula kind of give us what's the spending, right? For when we first start the project. But we need to consider as well, what is the sales? When we sell the asset, remember way back when at the start of this lecture, I told you we need to consider what is the cash flow we get after the project is ended and we sell off the asset. So how do we determine this cash flow? We need to use this concept of called salvage value. So how much value can we salvage from the asset? And at this point in time, I want to highlight that it's very different from book value. All right. So what's the difference? So book value is an accounting concept, right? Is what is the value less of. So I actually give you a formula book value here. Initial cost less accumulated depreciation. So this is the value that is in the books. But the book value might be very different from the salvage value, because let's say the book value, okay, we have a computer, right? And we depreciate it by 2 years, but we use a computer for 3 years. Now, at the end of 3 years, even though book value is 0 because we have depreciated everything, does that mean that the computer is worthless? Correct. No, right? And you can sell the computer after 3 years. So the sales of the computer or the proceeds for the sales of the computer is your salvage value. So this does the intuition. So what is salvage? It seems like a funny name, or as the name suggests, what can we salvage out? All right. So because we can still earn money from the sales of the computer after the book value is 0, we have this thing called salvage value, and we need to be able to calculate what is salvage value. And remember, for salvage value, there will still be tax, right? If you're going to sell something, we're still going to pay tax on the money that we get from the sales of the computer. So we have this after-tax salvage value. And how do we get that? We take what's the value we get salvage minus the tax rate times salvage minus book. Okay. So do not worry. So the idea of, I'll try to explain this formula. So the idea of this formula is that, yes, we get a salvage value, but we do need to pay tax on the salvage. So if the salvage value is more than the book value, for example, in the case of the computer, where the book value is 0, there's no more money, there's no more value in terms of book value, but we still can sell it for, let's say, $100 in the market. So we have earned a profit, right? We have earned a profit from the computer because the book value is 0, but we sell it for 100. And because there's this difference, the company is earning a profit on the sales, and therefore the profit should be taxed. And what should it be taxed at? It should be taxed at the tax rate, and therefore it will reduce the net cash flow of the salvage. So the after-tax salvage should be lesser, right? Because we are going to pay tax on this profit that we earn. Everyone understand this part? Why this formula exists? Because later, as we have more and more questions, you'll be a bit confused, like, oh, why minus, why plus, why sometimes the after-tax salvage increase, sometimes it decrease. So we need to know the concept of it, right? So we will not be confused. So the idea being that if the salvage is more than book value, you earn a profit. Okay? So if the salvage is less than the book value, meaning what? That means your book value of the computer, let's say, is $100, but you only can sell it for $50. So you're actually making a loss on the sales of the asset. And when you have a loss, what do you get? You will get a tax rebate. And therefore, the net cash flow of the after-tax salvage would be a positive. So it would be more than the salvage. So at the end of the day, you will get, for example, salvage is $50, right? So you will get, I don't know, maybe like $60 because you have a tax rebate that is going to happen. We have some examples to show you, but you need to understand the concept that why the after-tax salvage can increase or decrease. And this is relating to either a tax on the profit or a tax rebate on the loss. All right, so let's look at this example here. A project requires an investment of 1,000K for equipment. The project lasts for 5 years. Suppose that at the end of 5 years, the equipment can be sold for 500K. Book value is given by this, tax rate is given by this. So let's plug in some values here. So we know that initial investment will be a negative 1,000K here, all right, because we need to buy the equipment. In terms of year 5, okay, so we don't know what's the value of year 5, but let's think about it. The salvage value. So what's the salvage value first? So we know we can sell at the end of year 5 for 500K, right? This is a salvage value. The book value is given by 300K. We can get 300K. I mean, based on book value, 300K. So what's the after-tax salvage? So after-tax salvage, remember, use the formula 500K. 500 minus the tax rate of 40%. 500 salvage minus book of 300. So can you see that your salvage now, your after-tax salvage is 42K. 420K. And so your after-tax salvage is less, right? Because you have a profit, and therefore this profit will be taxed. So at the end of the day, your year 5, your cash flow that you receive from selling your investment in the equipment would be a positive 420K. Everyone understand this?
Sorry, I thought the tax should be on the profit, which is 500K minus 300K.
Yeah, that's
How
right.
to- Oh.
That's what happening here. Eh? 500 minus 300. So the
Oh,
tax, yes.
thanks.
Yeah. Everyone's okay with this? So the next question is the same, but now we can only sell the equipment for 200K at the end of 5 years. Okay, so let's calculate now. Salvage again is the same amount. What's the salvage? Sorry, 500K. So salvage is 500K. The book value is 300K, the same. Oh, sorry, no. Salvage is 200K. Because you given the question here. So what's the after-tax salvage? So let's see. After-tax salvage, the formula is salvage value 200 minus 40% multiplied by salvage 200 minus 300, right? Book value 300. This should give you 240K. Can you see now what's happening? The after-tax salvage increased by $40 compared to the salvage value, right? And that is because you are selling at a loss, and therefore you get a tax rebate that is happening here. Everyone can see this? Because you're selling at 200, but your book value is still 300. So you are getting a $100 loss, and therefore you get a tax rebate on the loss. Any questions? So these two examples shows you the tax on profit and tax rebate on losses. So I want to highlight again that whenever, okay, so next week we'll look at some questions, and the questions for this kind of project decisions can be very long. So I want to emphasize the importance of really reading the questions and dissecting the information slowly, and be very careful. When they have salvage value, always remember you need to calculate after-tax salvage. All right? Okay, so now we are going even deeper on this NCS component, right? So we already talked about salvage. Now, the NCS, right, which is relating to fixed asset, we know that depreciation is generally considered an accounting concept, right? There is actually no real depreciation happening. But nevertheless, we do have to consider depreciation to calculate the book value. Because previously, in this question here, the book value has been given to you, right? But the question is, how do we calculate book value? So now we're going to calculate book value. So book value is the cost minus away the depreciation. So do take note that residual value or book value, so residual value and book value is the same, is different from salvage value, right? So we have seen here, let me just flip back to a few slides. We see here, I want to highlight important, the terminology. Book value and residual value are the same and relates to initial cost minus accumulated depreciation, and salvage value is the sales price. Okay, so this is basically the straight line depreciation method. So let's try to use this concept to calculate book value here. So we have a asset that costs this amount. Depreciation is a straight line to zero for 8 years. Okay, but now the project is only 5 years. So now there's a mismatch, which is very common. Right? You buy an asset for 8 years that can last for 8 years, but your project is only 5 years. You don't need to use the full amount. The asset can be sold for this. So this is the S value, right? SV, salvage value. The relevant tax of this. So is the after-tax cash flow or after-tax salvage? So basically what they're asking here is after-tax salvage value here. So let's first calculate depreciation. So depreciation is how much? 635,000 divided by 8 years, right? It can last for 8 years. And they say 0 at the end. So we don't need to less off the ending value, right? Remember, I'm just going to flip back here. Your value is the depreciation expense is initial cost minus book value times this. So since it's 0, we don't need to consider that. So the answer here is 793.5. Sorry, 793. Let me just rewrite this. 79375. All right. So this is the depreciation expense. What is the book value now? So what's book value? BV. So book value, we know it is the cost of the asset minus the accumulated depreciation, right? And we know that this project was done for 5 years. So what's the accumulated depreciation? Depreciation is just 5 times 79375, right? So the book value is 238,125 here. Now, we want to calculate what's the after-tax salvage, right? I'm going to write it above. So after-tax salvage value, all right? After-tax salvage, we know that we're getting a salvage of 125,000. The formula is we need to less off the tax rate of 35%. And then the formula is salvage 125,000 minus the book value, right? What's the book value now? 238,125. So question, just looking at this formula here, is this a situation of a tax rebate or a tax on profit? So is it a tax rebate happening, or is it a tax on profit that's happening? Okay, so we have a bit of mixed answer here. So it's actually a rebate. Okay, why? Why is it a rebate? Do you notice the salvage is less than book value, right? This is book value. So I'm going to flip back a few slides. Don't worry if you didn't get that answer. But can you see here? When salvage is less than book value. So that was our case, right? Our salvage was less than the book value. Then you are actually selling the asset at a loss, and therefore you get a rebate, tax rebate. So salvage less than book value. So can you see here? I repeat again, salvage SV, and this is book value. Can you see that your salvage is less than your book value? So this is a rebate. So we should get a rebate of this. All right, we have one more question because this concept is quite new. So I put a few more questions. So we have example here. We purchase equipment for 100K. It costs 10K to have it delivered and installed. Based on the past information, you believe that you can sell the equipment for 17K when you are done with it in 6 years. The company marginal tax rate is 40%. What is the depreciation expense each year after accounting and after tax cash flow in year 6? First question, what is the cost of the equipment we should consider? Should we, is it 100K? Yes, that's right. I think some of you all already know. Maybe your accounting module, you have covered this, but you should consider both these values. So 110. So this is an accounting kind of concept I believe it should be covered in your first year accounting. Is there any cost relating to the initial startup of the equipment? So delivery cost. So I'm going to say a delivery cost should be included as well. Setup cost, I don't know, installation cost in this case. So any cost relating to the starting up of the fixed asset to make the fixed asset able to be used should be included, right? But this does not include manpower costs. Okay, I will repeat, it does not include manpower costs. So if you require manpower, for example, you say you hire an electrician, is not considered, that is considered expenses, but costs relating to the startup should be included. Okay, so in this case, depreciation is, let me just erase this. Since there is no book value, so it's 110, 123 divided by 8 years, right? Because we're going to use this machine for 8 years and there is no book value. We should get, wait, there is a book value. Okay, wait, this is, sorry, this is wrong. See, you can sell the equipment for 17K when you're done with it in 6 years. So what's happening here? The book value, okay, this question is not very clear, but what is saying here, the book value is 17K and the salvage value is 7K. So it's not very clear here, but what it's actually trying to say is that book value is actually 7K at the end of 6 years. So what's the depreciation expense now? 110, 123 minus 17K divided by 6 years. So depreciation expense should be 15500. So I would say the question is not so clear, but in the exam, don't worry, it will be very clear. So what's the book value in 6 years? You don't even have to calculate it because it's given in the question. 17 is the book value. Now, what is the after-tax salvage? So I'm going to go right at the top, the after-tax salvage value. So after-tax salvage is salvage value 170,123 minus 40% times the salvage value 17 minus the book value, right? So in this case, you see that there is no tax effect here because your book value and salvage value are the same. So there is no tax on profit and no tax rebate on losses that you get, right? Hope this is clear because your book value and salvage value are the same. So there is no effect. So I would say to be safe, you should always use the salvage value formula to calculate after-tax salvage, even though maybe you notice that, hey, you know what, maybe the book value and salvage value are the same, but just out of repetition, you should do calculate it, right? But of course, you can immediately see that after-tax is the same as salvage. You can just write here 7. You can just write answer here, right? And you get you will get the full marks. Just that if you are unsure, you write the formula, right? Okay, so we have talked a lot about the NCS component of things. We have talked about the salvage value, depreciation, book value, right? Now we are going to discuss a little more about the change in net working capital. And the net working capital, or basically working capital in general, is CA minus CL, right? So CA could include, inventories, AR, CL can be AP, right? But not necessarily so. Important to take note is that in considering the cash flows, we are interested in the change in the net working capitals, meaning the net working capital for, let's say, 2018 minus the net working capital for 2017. So from 2018 to 2017, there's a change, right? So we're interested in change, not the net working capital level. We're interested in the change. And after that, we need to have a minus. So whenever the net working capital increase, right? When we require more capital, it means what? It means that the cash flow is negative. Okay, I repeat again. Whenever there's an increase in net working capital requirement or increase in change in net working capital, means the cash flow is negative. And so it's a negative cash flow. And so what's happening here? Let's look at this example. So year 0 requires a total net working capital of 10, meaning the change is plus 10. All right. Now for year 0 to year 1, the change is plus 20. And 1 to 2 is minus 5 and minus 25. Everyone can get that? We are looking at change. So we're looking at year to year like this. And of course like that. Now, because remember I mentioned that when there's an increase in net working capital, it means that you need more cash flows. There is negative to cash flow. That's why we have this negative here. So because at the end of the day, we're interested in cash flow, right? So in terms of the cash flow, this is a negative cash flow. This is a negative cash flow. This is a positive cash flow. And this is a positive cash flow. Is everyone okay with this? Yeah. Now, the thing about this is that there is an important concept here, is that the summation of this figure, negative 10, minus 25, plus 5, and plus 25, must equals to 0. So this is always true. It must always be equal to 0, regardless of whether the question says so. Because this is usually a trap in the question, because the question would not even mention this, and you will not know that it must be equal to 0. So there's this concept called recovery. Recovery of change in net working capital. So the recovery will happen regardless of whether the question says so. And so when you aggregate your change, when you aggregate this change, it should be 0. So this is a check that you must do at the end of the questions relating to this topic. And we'll have one example in a little bit, and we'll see how the question did not even say about this recovery, but you need to know that you have to do a recovery. Everyone's okay with that? The recovery. This is usually a trap in the question. All right. So operating cash flow, there are a few approaches. We have discussed it in lecture 1, bottoms up, top down, and tax shield. I want to highlight to you the importance of operating cash flow. So operating cash flow is not equals to net income or bottom line. If you notice, how do we get operating cash flow? We need to add net income plus depreciation plus interest expense. So that's how we get operating cash flow. All right. So just be very careful. Do not assume that net income is equals to operating cash flow. It's not. You must be very careful with this. I want to also highlight that the tax shielding approach is particularly important and easy to use. So if you can use it, try to use the tax shield approach. We will have some example to show you tax shielding. So let's look at this example here. A project generates a revenue of 100, okay, so 1K, cash expense of 600, depreciation charge of 200, the tax rate here. So immediately, if we use the tax shielding approach, it's pretty simple. 100 minus 600. And what's the tax shielding approach say? 1 minus 35% plus what is the depreciation charge, right? Because your depreciation is going to shield, basically what your depreciation is doing is shielding your operating cash flow. So it shields you. So it shields the company by 35% of 200. And this should give you 330. Again, I want to highlight that we went into very much detail in lecture 1 on operating cash flows. So if you kind of forgotten, we watched the certain part of lecture 1 where we went into detail and we even proved the formulas. So this is kind of like a repeat, right? Okay, so we have another example on using the tax shield because, like I say, it's an important or kind of the method that's used most often. Even though there are other, you can use the bottom up and top down as well. So we have this 3 years expansion project. It requires a fixed asset of 1860K. The fixed asset will be depreciated straight line to 0 using 3 years. Until worthless, the project estimates to generate this amount of sales, the cost of this. So once you see all these figures, right, immediately think about for operating cash flow, immediately think about the tax shield approach. Okay, so let's do the tax shield approach here. Now let's calculate depreciation first. 1860,000 divided by 3 years. This should give us 620,123. All right, so once we have depreciation, we can use the tax shielding, where the depreciation is shielding our operating cash flow. So OCF, operating cash flow, it is equals to 1950,123 minus the operating cash flow times the tax rate of 35%. And then we have a shield, right? What's our shield? Our shield is this multiplied by the 35% tax rate here. Everyone understand this approach, the shield that we have discussed about? Yeah, okay. Okay, so now summary at the end of the day, right? So when we have an investment in fixed asset, we need to consider the after-tax salvage. We need to be able to calculate the book value, all right? In terms of the investment in working capital, we need to consider the change in working capital. And remember, we need to consider the negative value, right? Because we are talking about negative, we are talking about cash flow. So when there's an increase or the change is positive, right? There's an increase in net working capital, the cash flow effect is negative, all right? We need to consider the recovery, which is important. The next example will show you why. And we can calculate the cash flow from operations using the tax shield, using depreciation, or using the bottom-up net income approach. I want to highlight here that net income is not equals to operating cash flow. We need to add back your depreciation, we need to add back your interest expense. Okay, so please be very careful here. Net income is not equals to operating cash flow. Okay, so we have this example. We have this example here. Now, once we see this example, like once we notice like, wow, so many details, right? We should not use tax shield. So tax shield, when we use tax shield approach, right, it's kind of very simple to calculate operating cash flow. But once we see this, right, you see we have estimated sales, we have the sales price per can, the cost per can, estimated life. So this one we should use the top-down approach. Top-down meaning we calculate the various components. All right. So let's approach the question using the top-down approach, meaning that we reconstruct the P&L statement, profit and loss statement. All right. So, given here that we will sell 50K units and the sales price is $4, we get the sales number. So I'll not flip back to the other slides. So you have your slides in front of you. So we know that there is a cost per can, right? In the question, cost per can of $2.50 per unit, or variable cost. So we multiply it by 50K, and this will give us our gross profit. In the question, it's also stated that there is a fixed cost of 90K, right? So I'm just going to quickly show you fixed cost here. Sorry, no, this is not fixed cost. The fixed cost is here. So it's 12K. So fixed cost of 12K. All right. We need to include the depreciation of wait, how do we calculate depreciation? So depreciation is 100% depreciation over 3 years. So depreciation amount is 90K divided by 3, right? So it is 30K per year depreciation. All right. So we include depreciation here. We calculate what's the EBIT. We know tax is this amount. All right. And so we calculate the net income figure of this. Now, once we reconstruct the profit and loss statement, we can use this figure. The net income is very simple. We just do net income plus depreciation, right? And this will give us our operating cash flow. So operating cash flow equals to net income plus depreciation. So I don't want to go through this method because okay, so I guess the question is, when do we use the tax shield approach, when we use the bottom-up approach or top-down approach? So it really depends on the question. If the question is so comprehensive in the sense that there are so many components, normally the top-down approach or bottom-up approach is better, right? If the question is simple, they just say what's the cost, what is the revenue, and give you the depreciation, then you use the tax shield approach. All right. Now, I want to emphasize this thing. There is an investment in net working capital here, and this part usually is not given to you. They will not tell you this part here. These are comments I've written. So they say investment in net working capital is this. So once we know investment, it means that there is an increase in net working capital in year 0. All right. And when there's an increase in net working capital, means that in terms of cash flow, it will be negative. All right. Okay. So once we have calculated our operating cash flow here, we reconstruct the cash flow given like this. So we know that there is in year 0, there is a change in net working capital of -20, right? Remember, because where there's an increased net working capital means that there is a negative cash flow, right? Because negative change. In the question, they say there is a initial equipment cost of 90K. All right. They did not say that the equipment will be sold. So there is no salvage that we need to consider. But if they did tell us, then we need to consider salvage. But in this sense, don't have to. Now, we can plug in our operating cash flow for the 3 years given. Last but not least, remember the question did not mention about the recovery, right? But when we talk about the net change in net working capital, I highlight that recovery is usually a trick that the question do not tell you, but you need to always recover. So we know that at the start of the project, we have negative 20K. So at the end of the project, we need to have a positive 20K to recover our net working capital. And that's what's happening here. All right, and it's not given a question. So this part is usually missed out in a lot of answers in the exam. So I just want to highlight the importance of this. And so once we are able to get the various cash flows, we can use NPV, IRR, and we can decide if we should accept or reject. So should we accept or reject this project here based on NPV and IRR? So should we accept or reject this project? So we should accept, yeah? Because NPV is positive, right? IRR is also greater than, what's the cost of capital here? Let's see. Cost of capital is 20%, so it's greater than 20%. Perfect, right? So now can you see that what we're doing is we are reconstructing the cash flows now, and then we are implementing our decision-making rules, right? So we in the start of the lecture, we learned about decision-making rules. Now we're actually creating or like constructing the cash flows. All right, we have this other question, but the answers are given. So I'll not go through this. I'll skip this because there is a question that there is no answer. So I want to go through this one instead, okay, about this sausage machine. So let's look at this example of a sausage machine. We're looking to install a new sausage machine with a install cost of 735K. This cost will be depreciated straight line to 0 over the project's 5 years. At the end, the sausage system can be scraped, meaning salvage value, given by this, right? SV. The sausage machine will save the firm 204 per year in pre-tax operating costs, and will require initial investment in net working capital of this, right? So this is a positive increase in net working capital, means the cash flow will become negative, yeah? Become negative. Okay, so what's happening here? Now, I have given a template, of course, in the exam. You know, this is a very typical kind of way an exam question can come out. Of course, they will not give you the template. You're supposed to do it yourself. So let's first calculate the depreciation. We know that the sausage machine would cost 735,000 is depreciated straight line over how many years? 5 years. All right, depreciation straight line 5 years. So that means depreciation expense is this. So what is the after-tax salvage? So we know that we can salvage the machine for 105, 123 minus 34%. And the salvage is this. Minus the book value is 0, right? There's no more book value, so 0. Okay. So this answer should give you sorry, I think there's no space. Let me just write it here. 69300. So the after-tax salvage is 69300. In terms of the tax shield approach, because this example is quite simple, we can do the tax shielding. So what is our sausage machine will give us 204 1, 2, 3. There's no cost, right? Because we're talking about cost saving now. So there's no like profit or loss. So we don't really care about that. 1 minus 34%. Plus, what is our depreciation? 147,000 times the shield of 34%. And this should give us 184,620. So 184,620 will be our cash flows, right? Operating cash flows. So once we calculate these figures, we can plug in the values already. So for year 1 to year 4 is, we know our cash flow is 184,620. Actually, year 5 as well. All right. Okay, so negative change in net working capital. What is the figure? Can anyone find out what is it? For negative change in net working capital. It is negative 35, right? Because negative change, right? Because our change in working capital is 35. So I'm not going to flip back the question, but the change is 35. So we have negative change. And remember, recovery. So the question don't talk about recovery, but we have to recover 35K in 5 years. Yeah. The NCS, which is the investment, we need to invest how much? Negative 735K start, and we will get a salvage of 69300. Everyone okay with that? In terms of now, CFA basically is just the aggregation, right? We just aggregate. So this is negative 770,123, 184,620, and last but not least is 288,920. All right. So the NPV figure here should use Excel 28119, 38119. So it is positive, and we should accept. All right. At this point, I know the time is going to end, so I want to highlight something that even though I put year 1 to year 4 here, in Excel, right, you have to put all the years. You have to put 184,620 4 times. Yeah, put it 4 times. If you just put 1 time like this and you put NPV of this, you'll get the wrong answer. So you need to do 4 times. Yeah. Okay. So evaluating NPV, this time you can just look at it. Basically, the idea of this being that NPV is important, but how accurate NPV is will really depend on your cash flow estimates, right? Whether it's correct, your cash flow estimates and your WACC, which we have learned how to calculate it. So depending on whether WACC is correct and whether your cash flows are correctly constructed, it will impact your NPV decisions. Now, there is this part on scenario analysis. I would like to say that it's actually not very important. You can see why in a bit. I'll just quickly run through it. But there's not much to calculate. It's just more about understanding that it exists. There's scenario and sensitivity analysis. So scenario analysis is give the idea of what is the best, the worst, base, and best case. All right. And the idea is that at the best case or uppercase, everything here will be positive in the sense like everything is good. When is the base case, everything is base, and lowercase, everything is bad, right? Like it's like economic kind of issue, right? Like let's say a recession will affect all components of things. So this would mean that by using a scenario analysis, we can get what is the various decisions based on the various cases. And the idea of it is this. Usually, companies have a certain percentage where, let's say 10% is best case that will happen. Base case is 50%, and 30% is upper case, right? And so using the calculated NPV, we can actually determine the overall NPV. So let's look at this example here. So this example is about Nike, and we are given these probabilities of the various cases. So in a worst case scenario, 10% time it will happen, and NPV is this. All right. In the best case, it will happen 25% of the time, and the NPV is this. And there's the base case. So the base case is 65%, 65% here. So now, in terms of the NPV, we basically just use the probability times NPV, probability times NPV, probability times NPV, or the three cases, and we get this aggregated NPV. And if it's positive, then we should accept the project, because based on the various cases, it's still positive. There are some problems with scenario analysis. You can read through it. All the bad happens together, which might not be the case, because like maybe certain bad things only happen to the cost, but maybe sales is still good, right? So there are some comments about that. In terms of sensitivity analysis, the idea of it is that we are tweaking one component of the NPV formulation, and see how that tweaking this one component affect our NPV. So for example, this tweaks the unit sale. So if you increase the amount of units sold, what is the NPV profile, right? We are tweaking the number of units sold. In this example, we are tweaking the fixed costs, right? So if we tweak one fixed cost, what will be the effect on your NPV here? All right, so we provide some example of what's the strength and weakness of the NPV, also of the sensitivity analysis. You can just look through it. And so, yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages in using the sensitivity analysis and scenario analysis. I want to highlight to you that at the end of the day, this component of sensitivity analysis and scenario analysis is more for your understanding. Questions can come out in terms of more like qualitative kind of question. You need to know that they exist, how it's being done. Sensitivity analysis being tweaking just one component because we are testing how sensitive things are. Scenario analysis is the whole scenario, right? Base, best, and worst case scenario, right? Of course, there are some critiques here. So that's all I have today. Sorry, the end is a bit of a rush, but like I mentioned, the sensitivity and scenario, they are not that important. It's just more like theoretical, so you can have a look through. Any questions so far? So like today will be the second last lecture. Again, I repeat, next lecture will be on the Saturday, right? At 8:30. Those that need to leave, we are done. Thank you for your time. Let me just pause the recording.